So here's the deal, I'm a 29-year-old guy who thought I had my life pretty sorted. I've been through some ups and downs, sure, but everything felt like it was moving in the right direction until one simple decision turned everything upside down. Let me rewind a bit. I was raised by my aunt and uncle, who, by all accounts, did a pretty decent job. I always knew I was adopted, but growing up, it didn't really bother me. Sure, I had some moments where I wondered about my birth parents, but who doesn't? Especially when you're a kid with a bunch of random questions about who you look like or where your quirks come from. But it didn't consume me. I had a good life. A solid relationship with my family. Friends. A job I was starting to enjoy. But when I turned 28, something clicked. It was like an itch that started in the back of my mind and just wouldn't stop. I decided to track down my biological mother. Nothing too drastic. Just curiosity. I wasn't looking for some fairy tale reunion or a Disney movie moment, but, well, things didn't exactly go as planned. She agreed to meet. I honestly wasn't expecting her to say yes. My thoughts were all over the place. What if she had moved on? What if she was totally different from how I imagined her? What if she didn't even want to know me? But we met, and it was one of the most intense experiences of my life. My biological mother was everything I never expected, and nothing like I thought. She was in her mid-50s, older than I imagined, but she had this warmth about her that instantly felt familiar, almost comforting. But there was something else too. She was guarded. Like there was something underneath that smile. Something unresolved. I didn't know it at the time, but that was just the beginning of the storm brewing under the surface. Over time, we started talking more, and I began to understand bits and pieces about her life, the choices she made, and the circumstances that led to me being put up for adoption. It wasn't some heartwarming story. In fact, it was a mess of bad timing, poor decisions, and a lot of pain. But she had seemed genuine. And despite everything, we slowly built a connection. I wasn't prepared, though, for what came next. 6 months into these meetings, I got a call one evening from my lawyer. I hadn't expected to hear from him. But his voice was tense, urgent even, and that immediately made my stomach flip. "You might want to sit down," he said. Naturally, I thought something had happened to one of my family members. Maybe something financial went sideways. But nothing could prepare me for what came next. Apparently, my biological mother had filed a legal claim. Not just any claim, but a lawsuit for emotional distress against me. I was shocked. I had no idea what I was hearing. She said I'd caused her immense emotional harm by re-entering her life after so many years of being absent. My heart sank. Emotional distress? I didn't even know what that meant. We were just trying to get to know each other, slowly. But according to her, everything that was happening now, the reconnecting, the conversations, the memories, had stirred up a lot of old, unresolved pain for her. My first instinct was to laugh. It sounded absurd. How could my mere presence, after all these years, cause someone emotional damage? But then I remembered, this was real. A lawsuit. And it didn't make sense. Why now? Why after everything? Was she trying to manipulate me? Was she genuinely hurting? Was she, God forbid, using me for something? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I had already invested so much of myself into this. I'd shared personal stories, things I hadn't even told my closest friends. We'd spent hours together, reconnecting, and yet this was what I got for opening up? At first, I was numb. Just speechless. I couldn't understand how someone could claim emotional distress over something as innocent as trying to reconnect. But as I went through the details of the lawsuit with my lawyer, it was like the whole thing began to sink in, piece by piece, like a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. There was no turning back now. She wasn't asking for some apology, or even just an understanding. She wanted financial compensation. Cold, hard cash. I couldn't believe it. After everything we'd shared, after the time I'd put into rebuilding some kind of relationship, this was the result? So, I found myself in a situation I had never, ever imagined, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own mother, about relationships, and about what it really meant to reconnect after all these years. And just like that, I was thrust into a tangled web of legal jargon, emotional confusion, and moral dilemmas that I never expected would be a part of my life. I wish I could say this was just the beginning of a new chapter of understanding, but instead, it felt like the start of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So, here's where things started to get even more complicated. After the shock of the lawsuit wore off, I tried to take a step back. I'm not one for jumping to conclusions. I mean, I didn't want to believe my biological mother was the type of person who'd file a lawsuit for something like this. We'd been working through a lot, sure. There were awkward moments, emotional ones, but I thought we were moving forward. So I started to question, what was really going on here? I reached out to her, of course. I wasn't about to just roll over and let a legal battle erupt out of nowhere without hearing her side first. I didn't want to go into a courtroom without knowing where her head was at. So I called her, trying to sound calm, trying not to sound like I was accusing her of anything. I mean, she was still my mother, right? Her response? A lot colder than I expected. She told me she had been in touch with a lawyer for a while now, and that this wasn't just about emotional distress. She claimed that my decision to reach out to her was a triggering event. Her words, not mine. Apparently, reconnecting with me had dredged up so many painful memories of her past, of decisions she regretted, of mistakes she'd made, that it had pushed her to the brink. She said seeing me again had forced her to relive things she wasn't ready to face. The thought of having to re-examine everything she'd buried? It was just too much. Honestly, I could feel the shift in her tone. It wasn't the same woman I'd met months ago. She wasn't the warm, inviting person I'd shared stories with. She had turned into someone else. Someone defensive, maybe even bitter. The shift in her energy sent chills down my spine. It was like she was a stranger now. Like maybe she'd been playing a part all along. But then she dropped a bombshell. She told me she had been coerced into giving me a chance. That her lawyer had advised her it was a good idea to try and reconnect, but now, it had spiraled into something she wasn't prepared for. Coerced? I froze. What the hell did that even mean? Was she saying that the decision to reconnect wasn't even hers? That everything we'd been through, everything I believed to be a genuine attempt at building something real, was based on some kind of legal manipulation? The more she talked, the more the pieces didn't fit. And yet, the more I listened, the more I felt a deep, gnawing fear. Fear that I had made a huge mistake. Fear that the person I was starting to understand, starting to trust, was maybe someone I didn't know at all. And then she said it, I'm asking for financial compensation because of the mental toll this has taken on me. It's the only way I can begin to heal. There it was. The part one hadn't been expecting. It wasn't about an apology, or even just coming to terms with our past. She was asking for money. A lot of it. The kind of sum that would send my life into a tailspin if I had to pay. The kind of sum that made everything feel real and terrifying all at once. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe she was just venting or saying something out of frustration. But then she kept repeating it, almost like a mantra. Financial compensation. For her pain. Her emotional toll. I'll admit it. I snapped a little bit. The anger hit me like a freight train. How could she do this? After everything we'd talked about, after every moment I'd shared with her, How could she turn it all into something so transactional? It felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. But then, part of me wondered if she was really hurting. I mean, what if she was telling the truth? What if she was overwhelmed by the emotions, and this lawsuit, this desperate plea for compensation, was her way of trying to regain control? I was torn. On one hand, I didn't want to believe she was manipulating me. I didn't want to think that the woman who gave me life was capable of something like that. But then again, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that everything I thought I understood about her and our relationship was now being questioned. I didn't know what was real anymore. The woman I had spent months building a connection with seemed like a completely different person now. I was seeing this whole thing in a new light, and nothing made sense. And the legal papers? They weren't just about her asking for compensation. There were demands, legal threats, the kind of stuff that made me think she wasn't just emotionally distressed, she was after something much deeper. A settlement. A big one. I could feel the walls closing in. She wasn't the only one in pain here. I was too. I had opened myself up to her. I had trusted her. Now I was stuck in this web of confusion, betrayal, and fear. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. The person who was supposed to be my mother, who I had hoped to reconnect with, had become a complete stranger. I felt trapped. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to help her. But then again, I couldn't just ignore what seemed like manipulation. If I caved into her demands, I would be handing her everything. It would be like admitting that this whole emotional wrecking ball she had unleashed was my fault, that I had caused this spiral just by wanting to know her. I couldn't let that happen. But what if I was wrong? What if this was all my fault? What if there was something I didn't understand? I had no idea what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure: this was no longer just about a reunion. It was a fight. A fight for my own peace of mind, a fight for truth, and most of all, a fight for control over my own life. Things didn't slow down after that phone call. If anything, they picked up speed, like a train barreling down a track with no brakes. I barely processed the idea of my biological mother suing me for emotional distress when the first official papers arrived. I'll never forget the day they showed up, sitting on my doorstep like some kind of bad omen, waiting for me to open them and feel my stomach drop. I thought maybe I was dreaming. I really did. I stared at those papers for a long time, almost convinced they weren't real. Maybe it was just a mistake? Some crazy error in the system, right? But nope. The name on the top of the page was unmistakable: my birth mother's. And her lawyer's. I'm not gonna lie, I felt my blood run cold. I tried to read through the legal jargon, but honestly, the words blurred together. Financial compensation for emotional distress kept jumping out at me like a flashing neon sign, and it didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. What did feel real was the weight on my shoulders. I was in the middle of something I hadn't asked for. What was I supposed to do? Talk to her again? Go to court? Settle? Every option felt wrong, and each one made my stomach twist more than the last. The hardest part wasn't just the lawsuit, though. It was the fact that I hadn't even really had time to process everything we'd shared. Our conversations, our awkward silences, the moments that felt like breakthroughs. Was that all just a lie? Or had she really been struggling that much? If that was the case, why hadn't she been honest with me from the start? Why go through the motions only to hit me with a lawsuit? But here I was, staring at the papers, like some sick joke was playing out, except it wasn't funny. It was real. And I had to deal with it. I called my lawyer, of course. He was the one who helped me sort through the mess, though it didn't exactly make me feel any better. He was blunt. Too blunt, maybe. He told me straight up that my mother's claim was based on emotional manipulation and that, if I didn't handle it carefully, I could be in a much bigger mess. He was talking about potential settlements, negotiating pain and suffering. It sounded like something out of a bad TV drama. But I haven't done anything wrong, I said. I just wanted to get to know her. Doesn't matter, he said. The law doesn't care about your intentions. It's about perception. Right now, the way she sees it, you re-entering her life is damaging. You might have good intentions, but how she feels about it is the key here. We'll have to figure out if there's a way to smooth this over or if you'll need to fight back. Either way, you're in it now. It felt like the floor dropped out from beneath me. What was I supposed to do now? I spent the next few days going over everything I knew about my biological mother, trying to piece together what I'd learned from our conversations. I'd seen her as this fragile woman, someone who had gone through a lot but was ready to move on and start over. But now I wasn't sure if I was even looking at the same person anymore. She'd told me about her struggles, her past mistakes, the things she regretted. But was that all just a front? I had no answers. And the longer I sat in that confusion, the more the walls seemed to close in. I decided I had to talk to her again. Maybe if I could just sit down, face to face, we could sort this whole thing out. I couldn't let her make it all about money, about the legal stuff. It had to be about us, about the real reasons we'd reconnected. I couldn't let it be about lawyers and courts. Not after everything we'd shared. So, I called her. The conversation was uncomfortable, to say the least. I could hear the distance in her voice. The warmth that had been there before? Gone. Replaced with a coldness I didn't expect. She was guarded, evasive. I asked her outright, "Why didn't you tell me you were going to do this? You didn't mention anything about wanting compensation." She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her words were slow, careful. She said she'd been too overwhelmed by everything, the emotions, the memories. She said reconnecting had opened old wounds and that she hadn't been prepared for how it would make her feel. But then, the words that followed felt like a slap. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. I need help. I need something to start over. And that's why I realized it wasn't just about me. She wasn't asking for financial compensation because of some moral high ground. It was about her need to feel like she was in control. That maybe, by making this claim, she could regain some semblance of power over a situation that had spiraled out of her hands. Her voice cracked a bit as she spoke about how difficult her life had been. How she felt like she couldn't go back to her old life now, that meeting me had made everything too real. The guilt, the anger, the regret, it was all too much. I was torn, honestly. She sounded so broken, and part of me wanted to reach out and try to fix it. But the other part of me felt like she was playing me. Manipulating me. Was I just another one of her problems that she didn't know how to deal with? Was she using me to patch up her own life, even if it meant putting me in a place I never asked to be? I told her I needed time. A few days, at least, to figure everything out. I needed to think. She agreed, though there was a bitterness in her voice. She knew I was pulling away. And I hated that. But I had to pull away. If I didn't, I might lose myself in this mess. If I didn't take a step back, I was just going to keep getting dragged deeper into a situation that was quickly spiraling out of control. Time was running out, though. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just a matter of a lawsuit. This was about trust, power, and emotions I wasn't sure I could handle anymore. What was I supposed to do? Would she really take me to court? Would I lose everything? And, worst of all, would I lose the chance to understand who she truly was? The day of the hearing arrived faster than I was ready for. The dread had been building inside me like a storm cloud, and I knew I was on the edge of something that could change everything. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing through my head like a fast-forwarded movie. What was I even doing? Was this really the only way forward? Should I just settle and give her the money, get it over with, try to keep some semblance of peace? Or should I fight it out, dig in my heels, and risk losing whatever connection I had left with her? I couldn't figure it out. My lawyer said the best thing to do was to approach the situation head-on, but honestly, how could you approach something like this when you're caught in the middle of it, unable to see past the mess? The woman who had once seemed like a missing piece of my life was now nothing more than an obstacle, a stranger. When I walked into the courtroom, everything felt surreal. There's this weird, cold stillness in the air, the kind you only see in movies, but it was very real. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The tables, the people in suits, the thick, oppressive air that made everything feel heavy. And there she was. Sitting across from me, her face unreadable, but I could feel the tension rolling off her. She looked different than when we'd met. She looked like someone who had fought too many battles and was now just empty. Or maybe it was me who felt empty. I could tell right away this wasn't going to be easy. The lawyer she had hired was a sharp guy, confident, well-spoken. He immediately went for the jugular. His argument wasn't about some tearful reunion, some story about trying to build a relationship. No. It was all about how I had invaded her life, how my presence had reawakened long-buried traumas, and how that had caused irreparable emotional damage. It was all starting to feel like a bad dream. There she was, the woman I'd once hoped would be my link to understanding my past, sitting across from me and making claims that felt like they were straight out of a courtroom drama. And me? I was just the kid who wanted answers, the son who wanted to know who his mother was. I couldn't fathom how we got here. How this had turned into a war. A war over feelings, over money, over everything I thought was good and simple. Her lawyer spoke next. This was not just an emotional upset, he said, voice like a sharp blade. This was a disruption in the very foundation of my client's life. She had made peace with her past, and then, in one moment, it was shattered. I could see my mother nodding, her hands twisted tightly together in front of her. She wasn't even looking at me. She was staring at the floor, avoiding eye contact like it was a crime. It was so painful to watch, to feel like I was the one who had forced her into this position, the one who had triggered all her past regrets and guilt. I couldn't sit there and say nothing. So, I stood up, my legs feeling shaky as I made my way to the front. I wasn't prepared for the way my voice cracked when I spoke. I didn't come here to hurt you, I said, voice wavering at the start but growing firmer with each word. I came here because I wanted to know you. I wanted to understand. I wanted us to share something real, to make up for lost time. I paused, swallowing hard. It was so hard to look at her, but I forced myself to. But I didn't sign up for this. I didn't think you'd use our reunion as a way to get money out of me. Her face didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't seem moved by what I said. It felt like my words were just bouncing off her, unable to penetrate that cold wall she'd built around herself. She didn't even apologize. It was like she had already made her decision, already moved on from whatever I thought we'd shared. Her lawyer jumped in immediately, trying to put me back in my place, but I wasn't done yet. You can say I hurt you, you can say I triggered something in you, but I didn't force you to meet me. I didn't force you to agree to anything. I didn't know this was going to happen. And now you want compensation for your pain? For what? For something you decided to do? I didn't ask you to come back into my life with all this baggage. I thought we were starting fresh. I felt like a weight was pushing down on me, and I was suffocating under the pressure. It was all so twisted. I didn't even know if I was making sense anymore. What was real? What was I supposed to believe? I could hear the murmurs of the courtroom around me, the judge leaning forward, and for a split second, I thought I might actually lose my nerve. Then, the judge spoke. "You've both made your points," she said, her voice calm, but there was something stern behind it. "But I will not make a decision today. This will require further deliberation. I want both of you to reflect on what you've said. It's clear there's more here than just a legal matter, it's personal. And that's something that can't be decided in a courtroom." Her words hung in the air, lingering in that quiet, tense space. Personal. She was right. This whole thing was personal, wasn't it? More than just money. More than just legal claims. It was about who we were to each other, or who we weren't. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the tiniest bit of relief. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to make things right. But at what cost? Would we ever get back to a place of understanding? Would this court battle tear us apart completely? As the session ended, my lawyer looked at me, giving me that look that said everything without saying a word. He wasn't sure what the next step would be. I wasn't sure either. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. It was far from over. It's been a few weeks since the hearing. A few long, sleepless weeks where I've had more time to think than I care to admit. I won't say it's all settled, because it hasn't been. But I think I'm starting to piece together what really happened. Or, at least, I'm starting to understand what I can and can't control. After that hearing, things didn't go immediately downhill. I mean, the lawsuit's still out there, hanging over my head like some dark cloud. But the judge gave us both a little breathing room. We were told to come back for another hearing in a few weeks, but something changed in me. That moment, when the judge reminded us that this was personal, not just legal, it hit me harder than I expected. Because for the first time, I realized just how much we had both been avoiding the heart of it all. We had been skirting around the truth, letting lawyers speak for us, instead of talking to each other. And you know what? I couldn't do that anymore. I called her. My biological mother. It wasn't easy. My heart was pounding, and my palms were sweating before the phone even rang. I didn't know if she'd pick up, or if I'd even know what to say when she did. But she did pick up, and we just sat there in silence for a few seconds. I had no script in my head, no rehearsed lines. It was just me, hoping for some kind of breakthrough. "Mom?" I said, my voice a little shaky. I'd never called her that before. Not really. Not in that way. "Yeah," she answered, and there was a hesitation in her voice too. She didn't know what was coming next, and neither did I. "I think we need to talk," I said. "Really talk. Without the lawyers. Without all the stuff. I just want to understand. I just want to know if there's a way out of all this." There was another pause. Then, she sighed. It was a heavy, tired sigh, one that spoke volumes. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you." I almost didn't believe her. I wanted to scream, ask her how she could claim emotional distress and not think that was going to hurt me, too. But something about her voice made me stop. I could hear the exhaustion there, and for the first time, I could hear how broken she sounded. This wasn't the same woman who had filed the lawsuit. This wasn't the same person who had stood there in court and made all those claims. This was someone who had been through so much, someone who was still lost in the mess of her own emotions. We talked for hours that day. Hours of trying to untangle the knots that had formed between us. The pain she'd felt all those years ago when she made the decision to give me up. The shame. The regret. She said she thought she was protecting me, but she never fully understood how much it would hurt her, how it would hurt us both in the long run. And I realized something, too. I wasn't blameless in all of this. I hadn't just been this innocent son seeking answers. I had been putting expectations on her. I had been expecting this perfect, clean reunion, and when it didn't go that way, when it got messy and real, I couldn't handle it. I had, in some way, been running away from the complexity of the situation too. We both cried. And it wasn't the kind of tears I had expected. It wasn't about winning or losing, about the lawsuit, or about anything financial. It was just two people facing the raw truth of who we were and what we had both been carrying all this time. Neither of us had the answers, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was enough that we finally started to get it. So here's where we stand now. The lawsuit's still there, technically, but I've realized something. I can't keep letting it define everything between us. I don't know if we'll ever be the kind of family I imagined. I don't know if we can just move past all of this. But I do know this, I'm done with the games. I'm done with the lawyers and the courtrooms. I want to rebuild something, even if it's small and shaky and uncertain. The last time I spoke with her, we didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We talked about our lives. The things we missed, the things we regret. And maybe that was the first real conversation we'd ever had. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this is a new beginning, or just another chapter in a long story that's still unfolding. But I do know that I'm not giving up. Not on her, not on me. We're both still here, still trying to make sense of everything. Maybe that's enough for now. As for the lawsuit, we're still figuring it out. The court's not going to be the end of this, though. The real resolution? It's going to come from us, from the quiet moments where we talk, really talk, and try to make peace with the past. I've learned something valuable through all of this. Relationships aren't perfect. They're messy, complicated, and full of things we don't understand. But maybe, just maybe, that's what makes them worth fighting for. Even when everything seems broken, there's still a chance to rebuild, one piece at a time.